The planet Keth Mora was dead, and it had been dead for a long time, and nobody came here anymore. The sky above it was a dull orange color, like old rust scraped off something ancient, and the ground was cracked and pale gray, like skin that had been burned and never allowed to heal. There were no birds, no insects, no wind carrying any smell of life, just silence and ash and the occasional low groan of a broken structure settling deeper into gray dirt. Vaelith walked through all of it alone. She had been alone for so long that she had stopped counting the years. The years blurred together, the way things do when nothing ever changes and nobody ever stays. She was tall for a Cyrathi, with silver-blue skin that caught the dull orange light and gave it back as something colder. Her fingers were long and graceful, and she kept them curled close to her body at all times, tucked in and careful, the way a person keeps a blade sheathed even when they are not planning to use it. The difference between Vaelith and a person carrying a blade was simple. She could put a blade down. She walked past the ruins of what had once been a small colony outpost. Maybe 40 or 50 beings had lived here, she estimated, based on the number of shelters and the size of the communal water storage. Now there was nothing left that could be called alive. The buildings were hollow shells, with dark gaps where windows and doors used to be. The trees surrounding the outpost were black and brittle, snapped off close to the ground like old charcoal sticks that had been broken by a careless hand. The grass was entirely gone. The soil where the grass had been was pale and powdery, and it moved in faint clouds when Vaelith's feet disturbed it. She had done this, not on purpose. She never did anything on purpose. But she had passed through this colony 8 months ago, desperate for medicine and a dry place to sleep. And within 2 days of her arrival, the plants had begun to wither. Within 4 days, the animals were sick. By the end of the first week, the colonists were dying, and she was already running, the way she always ran, because running was the one useful thing she had learned in her life. It had not been enough. It was never enough. Vaelith did not cry about it anymore. She had used every tear she had a long time ago, and crying had never fixed anything anyway. Now she just walked and noted the damage with her eyes, and kept her hands at her sides, and moved forward, because forward was the only direction left. That was her life, walking forward through the wreckage she left behind, careful never to touch anything, careful never to stay long enough to matter. She was about to leave the ruins when she heard a sound. It was a small sound, a scrape, like something heavy being dragged across a metal floor. She stopped walking and tilted her head. The sound came from the old supply depot at the far end of the colony, the only structure that was still mostly standing, its roof warped but intact. She watched it for a long moment without moving. The sound came again, louder, and then a voice followed it, low and rough, and speaking in a language she recognized as human standard. She moved toward the depot carefully. She did not want to be seen. She never wanted to be seen by anyone, but she needed to reach that building first, because if there was a living person inside, she needed to warn them away before they spent one more minute breathing air that was too close to her. She pushed the cracked door open and looked inside. There was a human on the floor, a male based on the build and the voice, sitting beside an overturned storage shelf and going through a supply box with both hands. He was wearing a military uniform that had experienced a very bad week, torn at the shoulder, stained dark along the left side from what had clearly been a serious wound, and layered with the pale gray dust of Keth Mora. His face was drawn and pale beneath a coating of grime. His eyes, when they came up and found her in the doorway, were brown and sharp, alert in a way that told her he was not as weak as he looked. Most beings who saw her either screamed or ran before she could speak. This one looked at her with those sharp brown eyes and said in a calm and tired voice, "Hey." Valeth stood very still in the doorway. "You need to leave this place," she said, and she kept her voice flat and careful, the way she always did, because flat and careful did not invite conversation. The human looked at the ash-covered floor around him, then back at her. "Leave to where, exactly?" he asked. "There is nothing out there." "There is nothing useful in here either," she said. "Everything in those supply boxes is expired or contaminated. This colony has been dead for months." "I found water," he said, and held up a sealed canteen he had clearly dug out from the bottom of the pile. Sealed metal container. Should still be clean. He studied her face with open curiosity. "You are Sarathi," he said. "I have seen images in military briefings. You are very far from Sarathi space." "So are you," she said. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "My transport got shot out of the sky 3 days ago, and everyone else on board is dead, so I am not having a great week." He said it without drama, just plainly, like a person reporting facts they had already finished feeling sad about. "Sergeant Marcus Hale, 3rd Forward Unit, if that means anything to you." He looked at her and waited. "It does not," she said. "Fair enough," he said, and drank from the canteen. Valeth stood in the doorway and felt something uncomfortable moving through her chest. He was going to keep talking. She could see it clearly. The way some people simply produce conversation, the way a fire produces heat, without effort, without stopping. She could not let him get comfortable near her. She could not let this become a situation where he relaxed and stayed. Because staying near her was the most dangerous thing a living creature could do. She had to tell him now. "You do not understand the situation," she said, and her voice came out harder than she had planned. "This colony, these ruins, these dead trees, this ash on the ground, I caused this. I walked through here 8 months ago, and every living thing I passed near began to die. Not because of a weapon, not because of a disease, because of me, because of my hands." She raised both hands and spread her long silver fingers wide, and she watched his eyes move to them immediately. "My touch is entropic. It breaks down living tissue and accelerates decay in any organism. I have no way to switch it off. I have no control over it. Everything that stays near me long enough will die." She waited for him to run. She had delivered this same speech many times in her life, in many different languages, on many different worlds. The response was always the same: fear, then distance, then silence. Marcus Hale looked at her hands. Then he looked at the pale ash coating the floor of the ruined colony around him. Then he looked at her face, and his expression was not frightened. It was something else, something slower and more careful. "Everything you touch dies," he said, as if he was making absolutely sure he had the right words. "Yes," she said. "Everything that gets close to you. Yes, everything. Every plant, every animal, every person, anything that lives near me for long enough will die." Her voice had started to crack now, just at the edges, and she hated that. She hated when the flatness broke and the exhaustion came through. All those decades of it pressing upward. "So, you have to go, right now, before." "Then, touch me," he said. The depot went completely quiet. Valeth stared at him. Marcus Hale sat on the ashen floor of that ruined dead place, with his torn uniform and his found canteen and his steady brown eyes. And he looked directly back at her, and there was not a single trace of fear anywhere in his face. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me," he said, quietly, simply, as if it were the most reasonable sentence that had ever been spoken in any language, on any world. Valeth's hand rose. She did not choose to raise it. It simply lifted, the way a body moves a half-second before the mind has decided anything. And her long silver fingers reached toward him through the still air of that ruined place. And then she stopped. Her hand hung between them, shaking just slightly, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his skin. And she could not move forward, and she could not pull back. and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not know what to do next. Vaylith pulled her hand back. She curled her fingers in against her palm, pressed her fist to her side, and turned her face away from Marcus Hale, as if looking at him directly had become something she was not prepared to do. The depot was quiet around them, and the silence felt very large, and she stood inside it like a person standing inside a building that might collapse at any second. "That was not funny," she said. "I was not joking," Marcus said. "Then you are an idiot," she said. "That is also possible," he agreed, and she heard the faint sound of him shifting his weight, adjusting how he was sitting on the floor, like a person settling in for a long conversation, rather than fleeing for his life. "But I am an idiot who is still here, and I am an idiot who does not have anywhere else to go tonight. And you look like someone who has not spoken to another living person in a long time, so maybe we just sit in this ruined place together for a few hours and see what happens." Vaylith turned back and looked at him. "What happens is that you die," she said flatly. "Everything alive dies eventually," he said. "That is not a unique feature of your company." She stared at him for another long moment. Then, because her feet were tired and the floor of the depot was flat, and the alternative was walking back out into the orange-gray dark of Keth Mora alone, she lowered herself carefully to the floor on the far side of the room, as far from him as the space allowed, and sat with her back against the cold wall and her hands folded tight in her lap. "There is a maintenance bunker below this colony," she said after a moment. "Old Sarathi research construction, pre-conclave. It has reinforced walls and sealed air systems, and it will be safer than this building if anything comes looking for either of us." "You know this planet?" Marcus asked. "I know every planet that has a Sarathi ruin on it," she said. "They are the only places I can stay without—" She stopped. "They are the only places where I have stayed before." Marcus nodded as if this made perfect sense. He did not push for more, and she noticed that, and found it strange. Most people either ran from her or demanded explanations, lists of exactly how dangerous she was, as if understanding the mechanism of their potential death would somehow make it better. This human just nodded and accepted the information as given and moved on. "How long have you been on this planet?" he asked. "I arrived 2 days ago," she said. "I was passing through. I do not stay in one place for long." "Smart," he said. He drank from his canteen again. "My unit was escorting a supply transport through this sector when we got hit from below. Someone knew our route. This was not random." His jaw tightened briefly. "I was the only one who made it to an escape pod. I have been on the ground for 3 days now, no working comm, no signal." "The Conclave patrols this sector," Vaylith said carefully. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Just slightly, a small tightening around the eyes. "The Conclave shot down a human military transport?" he said. "I said nothing about who did it," she said. "No," he said, "but the way you said it told me everything. Why would the Conclave come after a routine supply run?" "That is a question I cannot answer for you," she said, and she meant it. She could guess, but guessing out loud felt dangerous, and she had learned long ago that speaking dangerous things out loud had a way of making them more real. They moved to the bunker before the orange sky darkened to black. The entrance was behind a collapsed wall panel at the back of the depot, a heavy hatch, corroded but still functional, leading down a short ladder into a sealed space that still had power. Dim amber lighting came on automatically when they entered, casting everything in warm old light. The air systems hummed. The walls were thick and dark gray Sirathi alloy, stamped with research codes that Vaylith recognized from her early life before everything changed. She did not tell Marcus what the codes meant. Not yet. He found a fold-out cot near the wall and lowered himself onto it slowly, and she could see from the way he moved that his left side was hurting him more than he was admitting. She kept her distance, but she watched him, the way she always watched every living thing near her, waiting for the first signs. The first signs were always the same. A faint pallor in the skin, a slowing of movement, a dullness in the eyes, the body beginning to lose the argument against the entropic field she carried constantly in her hands and skin. With most species, the first signs appeared within an hour of sustained proximity. With more sensitive species, within minutes. 1 hour passed. Marcus was awake, turning a broken piece of equipment over in his hands, examining it with idle interest. Valeth watched. 2 hours passed. He found a ration pack in the bunker's emergency locker, and ate half of it, and offered her the other half, and she declined, and he finished it without comment. Valeth's scanning instrument, a small flat device she wore on her wrist, was running continuously, and the readings it was returning were making her feel something she could only describe as the intellectual equivalent of the floor dropping out from under her feet. His cellular readings were not what they should be. She crossed the room, quickly, closer than she usually allowed herself to any living person, and held her scanner out toward him and stared at the results. His cell regeneration rate was elevated, not by a little. His body was producing new cells at a rate that was compensating for the ones her field was degrading, not perfectly, not without cost, but enough. The balance was almost even. "You are running a scan on me," Marcus said, without looking up from the piece of equipment in his hands. "Yes," she said, because denying it would have been ridiculous. "What does it say?" "It says that you should be showing early decay symptoms and you are not," she said. "It says your body is repairing itself fast enough to almost keep up with the damage my proximity causes." Now he looked up. "Almost," he said. "Almost," she confirmed. "It is costing your body significant energy. Your cellular repair systems are working at a level I have never observed in any species." She looked at him and could not keep the scientific fascination entirely out of her voice. "Human biology is, your cells are not ignoring the damage. They are fighting it. Every individual cell is responding to entropic pressure the way a soldier responds to incoming fire, by fighting back rather than falling." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Is that weird?" he asked. "It is extraordinary," she said. He said, and looked back at the piece of equipment. "I always healed fast. My unit medic used to complain about it. Said I made her look unnecessary." He turned the component over in his fingers. "So, I am not going to die from being near you?" "I did not say that," she said carefully. "I said your body is compensating. At this distance, and this duration, you are managing. But I do not know what happens with longer exposure or closer contact. I have never had a subject." She stopped. "A subject?" he said. "A person," she corrected. "I have never had a person near me long enough to observe this progression." He looked at her again, and the look was quiet and even. "You have been alone for a long time," he said. Not as a question, not as something that needed her to confirm it. Just a simple statement, said without pity, said the way a person states a fact they can see clearly with their own eyes. Valeth did not answer. She went back to her side of the bunker and sat down and looked at her scanner and tried to process the data calmly and scientifically and without feeling anything complicated. She did not entirely succeed. She was still processing it an hour later when the scanner on her wrist picked up a second signal. Not biological this time. Mechanical. A small aerial drone passing over the surface above them, running a standard conclave identification sweep. She sat very still and watched the signal arc across her scanner screen and continue moving and eventually pass out of range. She looked at Marcus across the dim amber space of the bunker. He had seen the signal on her scanner. She could tell from the way his expression had shifted, gone still and flat and watchful. The same look he had given her when she first mentioned the conclave. "They are looking for one of us," he said. "Or both," she said. He nodded slowly and set down the piece of equipment he had been turning over in his hands for the last 2 hours, and he looked at the hatch above them, and she could almost see him running calculations behind those steady brown eyes. "Then I suppose we had better figure out what we are going to do, he said. Morning on Keth Mora did not feel like morning anywhere else. The orange sky just got slightly less dark, and the ruins of the dead colony became visible again in gray outlines and pale shadows. And nothing moved, and nothing sang, and the silence sat over everything like a heavy cloth. Valeth had not slept. She had spent the night with her back against the bunker wall, and her scanner in her lap, watching the screen for signals, and thinking about human cell biology, and trying very hard not to think about anything else. Marcus had slept for 4 hours, directly and completely, the way soldiers apparently learn to sleep, like a switch being turned off and then back on again. He woke up, sat up, rolled his shoulder twice, winced once, and asked if there was any more food. There was not. Then we need a plan, he said, and he said it the way he said most things, simply and without panic, as if the situation were a problem to be solved, rather than a catastrophe to be survived. He looked at the scanner in Valeth's lap. How many drones passed over while I was asleep? 3, she said. Different flight patterns each time. They are mapping the surface in sections. Standard conclave search grid. Looking for you? He asked. Looking for me, she confirmed. Then she paused, because the next part was the part she had been sitting with all night, the part that tasted bad and hard and true. But not only to remove me, she said. I accessed the bunker's old data terminal last night. There are conclave encrypted files stored in this system. Files from before I was exiled. Files about the research that was conducted here. Marcus waited. She pressed her lips together and made herself say the next words, flat and clean, without letting the anger color them too much. I was not born with my ability, she said. The Sarathi do not naturally produce entropic fields. This bunker, this research station, was one of several locations where the Conclave conducted biological modification experiments on Sarathi subjects approximately 40 years ago. The goal was to create living weapons, beings who could be deployed to neutralize enemy populations without conventional arms. She looked at her hands. I was 11 years old when they brought me here. The bunker was very quiet. I escaped after 3 years, she said. Or I believed I escaped. Now I think they let me go. A weapon needs to be tested in the field before it is considered functional. And I was functional. I destroyed everything I touched for decades, and the Conclave tracked every casualty, every dead colony, every world I passed through, and they recorded it all as data. She looked up at Marcus. Now I have found their files. I have found the names of the scientists, the locations of the other subjects, the full record of what they did. And that is why the drones are here. Not just to eliminate a hazard, to eliminate a witness. Marcus sat with this for a moment. He did not look shocked. His expression was the kind of steady, quiet fury that does not make noise. How many other subjects? He asked. 7 that survived the modification process, she said. I do not know how many are still alive today. And these files? Can you copy them? I already did, she said, and held up a small data chip. Something moved in his face then. Not quite a smile, but close. A look of focused satisfaction. The way a person looks when a complicated puzzle suddenly shows them the one piece they needed. Good, he said. Then we have something worth protecting. He stood up and rolled his other shoulder and looked at the hatch above them. They are going to send more than drones eventually. When the drones do not find anything definitive, they will send ground units. We need to move before that happens. Move where? Valeth said. This is a dead planet with no working comm stations and no active landing infrastructure. There is a secondary comm relay on the eastern ridge, Marcus said. I saw the tower when my pod came down. It looked damaged, but not destroyed. If I can get to it and run a bypass on the power junction, I can send a signal on a human military frequency, one the Conclave does not monitor. You want to climb an exposed ridge in full view of conclave aerial surveillance, in order to repair a broken comm tower? Yes, he said. That is a terrible plan, she said. It is the only plan, he said, unless you have a better one. She did not have a better one. She had spent all night with the data files and the scanner, and she had not produced a single alternative, and she was honest enough with herself to admit it. You cannot reach the ridge unseen during the day, she said finally. The drones will spot you before you are halfway there. Then I need a distraction, he said, and he looked at her with those steady brown eyes, and she understood immediately what he was suggesting. No, she said. You can disable a drone with your field from close range, he said. You told me yourself the entropic energy breaks down mechanical systems too. Not as fast as biological ones, but fast enough. If you draw 3 or 4 drones into the ruins on the western side of the colony while I move east. I told you no, she said, and she heard her own voice go sharp. You are asking me to use my ability deliberately, as a weapon, and I will not do that. You would not be hurting anyone, he said carefully. Only machines. It does not matter, she said. The moment I use it on purpose, I become exactly what the Conclave made me to be. I become the weapon they designed. She was on her feet now, and her hands were shaking slightly at her sides. I have spent 30 years refusing to be that thing. I will not start now. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He did not argue. He did not push. He just looked at her with an expression that was entirely serious and entirely kind, which was a combination she was not at all prepared for. There is a difference, he said quietly, between what someone made you and what you choose to do with what you have. He paused. A person can be given a knife by someone with bad intentions and still use it to cut bread. The knife does not care about the original intention. Only the person holding it does. He held her gaze. You would be choosing. That is the part that matters. Valeth looked at the floor of the bunker. She looked at her hands. She thought about the 11-year-old she had been, brought into a room that looked like this one, told that what was about to happen to her was for the good of galactic order. She thought about 30 years of running and 30 years of ash, and the data chip sitting in her palm, with every name and every crime recorded on it. She closed her fingers around the chip. Only the drones, she said. Only the drones, Marcus agreed. They moved at midday when the light was flattest, and the drone patrol pattern had its longest gap. 11 minutes between sweeps on the western side, which Valeth had calculated precisely from her night of watching. She moved into the open ruins, and she raised her hands, which she had not done deliberately in 30 years, and she waited. The first drone came in low over the dead tree line, running its scan sweep, and she stepped into its path and held her ground, and let her field go outward, not wild, not panicked, but directed, like opening a door she had always kept locked. The drone's systems failed in under 4 seconds. It dropped into the ash with a dull metal sound. Valeth stood over it and breathed. It felt nothing like she had expected. She had expected it to feel like surrendering something. Instead, it felt terrifyingly like finally standing up straight after years of keeping herself bent and small. 2 more drones followed. She took them both down in the open ground west of the colony, moving between the ruins calmly, and the whole time her scanner was tracking Marcus's signal as he moved fast and low across the eastern ground, heading for the ridge. He reached the tower. She heard him in her earpiece. They had rigged a short-range comm from bunker parts that morning, and his voice was steady and unsurprised, the way it always was. Power junction is fried, but the transmitter core is intact. Give me 6 minutes. You have 4, she said, because a 4th drone signal had just appeared on her scanner, larger than the others, moving fast from the north. Then I will do it in 4, he said. She turned to face the incoming drone and raised her hands again, and felt something she did not have a good word for, something that lived right on the line between terrifying and free. And then Marcus's voice came back in her ear, and it was the voice of a person who had done exactly what he said he would do in exactly the time he said he had. "Signal sent," he said. "Now we run." The conclave ships arrived before nightfall. Valeth saw them from the ridge, 4 mid-sized patrol vessels dropping through the orange sky in tight formation, running dark with no identification lights, the kind of approach that was not an inspection or an inquiry, but a statement. They were not here to ask questions. They had moved past questions entirely and arrived directly at the part where things got destroyed. Marcus stood beside her on the ridge and counted the ships with calm eyes. 4 vessels, he said. Standard conclave patrol configuration carries 12 ground troops per ship. He did the arithmetic without needing to say it out loud. His expression did not change, but something behind it went very still and very focused. "Your signal," Valeth said. "Did anyone respond?" "Not yet," he said. "But the signal is still transmitting on a loop. Someone will pick it up. The question is whether they pick it up before those ships land." The ships landed. They came down in a wide circle around the colony ruins, positioning themselves to cut off every exit route, which was professional and thorough, and told Valeth that Commander Therex, whose name she had found in the bunker files, the officer assigned to her case for the last 6 years, had done his preparation carefully. She had read his file in the data terminal the night before. He was patient and precise and had never once failed a containment assignment. She and Marcus dropped back from the ridge and moved fast through the dead terrain toward the bunker. There was nowhere else to go. The bunker was the only structure with walls thick enough to matter, and the only position they had already mapped and understood. Running blind across open ground toward the ships would have been simply giving up in a more exhausting way. They dropped through the hatch and sealed it above them. Valeth went immediately to the terminal and pulled up the surface sensor grid she had been running since the previous night. 51 life signs spread across the surface above them, moving in disciplined patterns toward the colony center. Therex was not rushing. He was walking his forces in slowly, methodically, sealing every gap before moving forward. The kind of approach that said he had all the time available to him, and he knew it. "He knows where we are," she said. "He knows we are underground somewhere in this colony," Marcus said, checking the one functional weapon they had, a short-range energy pistol from the bunker's emergency locker, half-charged. "He does not know exactly which entrance, but he will find it." "What do we do when he does?" Valeth asked, and she was surprised to hear the question come out of her own mouth so plainly. She had spent 30 years making every decision alone, and the habit of asking someone else had not existed in her for decades. And yet here it was, arriving naturally, without effort. Marcus looked at her. "We make it very clear that taking us quietly is not an option," he said. "Therex wants no witnesses and no noise. He wants this handled cleanly with no record. The moment this becomes loud and complicated and documented, it becomes dangerous for him, more dangerous than we are." He held up the data chip. "These files become his worst problem the moment anyone else sees them. He knows you have them. That is why he came in force instead of sending a single retrieval unit." "He will not negotiate," she said. "But we are going to make him." The first conclave troops reached the bunker entrance 40 minutes later. They did not knock. A shaped charge blew the hatch off its frame, and 4 soldiers in full tactical armor dropped through in rapid sequence. And Valeth and Marcus were already at the far end of the bunker's lower corridor, with the single blast door between them and the entry room. Marcus fired twice through the narrowing gap before the door sealed. Both shots hit. She heard the sounds on the other side, and knew from the sounds that he had not missed. "2 down," he said, without satisfaction, just information. The blast door would hold for a few minutes. Sarathi alloy at this thickness was not fast to cut through, even with conclave equipment, but a few minutes was a number with an end. and they both knew it. Valeth was watching the sensor display on her wrist, and counting the signals above them, and running the numbers, and coming up with outcomes she did not like. "There are too many of them," she said. "Even if your signal reaches someone, it will not reach them in time." "Then we need to slow Therex down ourselves," Marcus said. He looked at her. "The corridor above us, the main access tunnel that runs east from the entry room, it is the only wide path into this section. Everything else is maintenance crawl space. If something disabled the support struts on that tunnel, it would collapse and block the route," she said. And she understood exactly what he was saying before he finished the thought. "The struts are old Cyrothi alloy," he said. "I know what they are," she said. "You could reach them from the maintenance crawl space on the left side if you went in 20 meters and turned at the junction," he said. "I know," she said again. She went. The crawl space was low and dark and smelled of old recycled air, and she moved through it fast on her hands and knees, with her scanner in one hand, found the junction, turned, found the first support strut, old gray alloy, cold under her fingers, and pressed both palms flat against it, and pushed her field outward, hard and fast. The strut began to decay under her hands immediately. She could feel it happening, the molecular structure breaking down, the metal going, grainy and soft. And she moved to the second strut and did the same, and then the third. And then she heard the tunnel above her groan, and she moved backward fast, back through the crawl space, back into the corridor just as the access tunnel collapsed, with a deep grinding crash that shook dust from the bunker ceiling. Marcus was waiting at the corridor entrance. He grabbed her arm to steady her as she came out of the crawl space, and pulled her upright. She felt it the moment his hand closed around her arm. Her field, still running high and hot from the struts, flooding into the contact point. And she heard him make a sharp sound through his teeth, and she tried to pull away. He did not let go. "I am hurting you," she said, hard and urgent and very close to desperate. "You are not killing me," he said, and his voice was tight but steady. He kept his hand on her arm. She could feel his pulse under her fingers, fast but strong. And on the scanner screen, she could see his cellular activity spiking in real time, the repair systems firing at maximum, his body throwing everything it had at the damage her field was creating, and winning, barely, like a person sprinting at a pace they cannot sustain, but refusing to slow down. "Marcus," she said. "I am fine," he said. "You are not fine. Your cellular repair index is at 140% above baseline, and that is not sustainable. And if you do not let go, everything I touch dies." She had said those words to him the first time they met, raw and cracked and exhausted. Now he turned them back to her gently, quietly, like returning something she had lost. "That is what you told me." He looked at her directly. "Is that still true?" She looked at him. She looked at his hand on her arm, still there, still holding, at his eyes, still clear and brown and entirely present. "No," she said, and the word came out of her like something that had been held under water for 30 years, finally breaking the surface. Marcus released her arm slowly. There was a visible mark on his skin where she had held, red and slightly raw, and he looked at it with mild interest, and then looked back at her, with no fear at all. Above them, the sensor grid showed Therex's forces halted at the collapsed tunnel, regrouping, running new calculations. And then, cutting through the static on the comm unit they had built from bunker parts, a new signal arrived, a human military frequency, a voice, female and sharp, saying a call sign that made Marcus close his eyes briefly and let out one long, slow breath. "That is my commanding officer," he said. "They are in this sector. Therex does not know that yet." Valeth looked at the sensor grid. Therex was still regrouping, still confident, still certain this was a quiet problem he was going to solve cleanly. She looked at Marcus. "He is about to find out," she said. Commander Therex was a patient man, but he was not a man who liked surprises. He had run 47 containment operations in his career for the Conclave, and he had closed every single one of them, cleanly and quietly and without incident. And he had built his reputation on exactly that, on the absence of incident, on the silence afterward, on the way problems simply stopped existing once he was assigned to them. He was good at his work, and he knew it. And that knowledge sat in him like a comfortable weight. He was standing on the gray surface of Keth Mora, outside the collapsed tunnel entrance, listening to his technical team calculate a new route into the bunker, when the ships appeared. They came in fast from the east, 3 vessels, larger than his patrol ships, running full identification lights and broadcasting on an open military frequency. And they were human. Therex stood very still. His communications officer turned from her console with an expression that told him the news before she said it. "They are responding to a distress signal, Commander. Human military encoding, broadcast on loop from this location for the past 2 hours." She paused. "They are hailing us." Therex looked at the 3 human ships settling into a holding position above the colony, and he did the calculation that he had never had to do before in 47 operations. How loud was this now? How many people knew a signal had been sent from this location? How many people were now watching the outcome of this operation on a screen somewhere? The answer was too many. "Open the channel," he said, and his voice was flat, because he was a professional, and professionals did not show what they were feeling, when what they were feeling was the particular cold sensation of a plan becoming undone. The human commander on the channel was a woman named Colonel Sarah Vance, and she was polite in the way that people are polite when they are holding a better hand than you, and they know it. She asked, with great courtesy, why a conclave force of 51 personnel was conducting a ground operation on a neutral jurisdiction planet without filing a territorial notification. She asked this as if she did not already know the answer. She asked as if she were simply curious. Therex answered with the standard language: hazard containment, classified biological risk, conclave authority under the Interspecies Safety Accord. He said it all correctly and professionally, and he watched it land on the conversation like stones dropped into deep water, sinking without effect. Because Colonel Vance then said something that made the comfortable weight in Therex's chest turn cold. She said that a data transmission had been received by her vessel, along with the distress signal. She said the transmission contained a large number of files. She said those files were currently being reviewed by 3 separate legal teams. She said the words, Sarathi biological modification, and unauthorized experiments, and documented casualties, in a tone that was still entirely polite and entirely devastating. Therex said nothing for 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds he understood that this operation was over, not paused, not delayed, but finished in a way that could not be reversed. The files were already transmitted, the legal teams were already reading, the 3 human ships above him were already recording everything that happened next as evidence. "Stand down your ground forces," Colonel Vance said. "We are coming to retrieve our personnel and the individual known as Valith of the Sarathi. Any interference will be logged and transmitted to the Interspecies Court within the hour." Therex stood on the gray dead ground of Keth Mora for another moment. Then he gave the order to stand down. He did not do it gracefully, but he did it. Below in the bunker, Valith heard the order come through on her surface sensor grid. All 51 conclave signals stopping, holding position, and then beginning to pull back toward the ships. She sat with the scanner in her hands and watched each signal retreat, and felt something very strange happening in her chest. Something she had no current word for, because she had not felt it in so long that she had forgotten what it was called. Marcus was beside her, his arm against hers as they both watched the screen. and he said nothing because he did not need to say anything, and she found that she did not want him to. Colonel Vance's team reached the bunker entrance in 20 minutes. 4 human soldiers and a medic who looked at Marcus's arm with professional concern, and at Valeth with careful, deliberate respect. The medic did not flinch when she saw the scanner readings. She looked at the data, and asked clear and specific questions, and treated every answer as information rather than cause for alarm. That alone was enough to make Valeth feel something she could only describe as fragile and enormous at the same time. They were taken up to the colonel's ship, a wide, clean vessel that smelled of recycled air and engine warmth, and Marcus was treated for his injuries, and Valeth was given a sealed private space, and the data chip was taken by legal personnel with careful, documented hands. And the process of everything becoming real and official and on the record began. It took 3 weeks. The legal proceedings were complicated and loud and happened mostly in rooms Valeth was not in. And there were many long, careful conversations, and many formal documents, and many representatives from many species saying many things in chambers that she observed through glass screens. The conclave denied the original accusations. Then evidence was presented. Then the conclave denied the evidence. Then more evidence was presented. Then 3 conclave officials resigned in the same 48-hour period, which Valeth observed from a quiet room on a neutral station with a cup of warm liquid in her hands and a calm expression on her face. Marcus came and found her in that quiet room every evening. He never made it a large thing. He simply arrived, sat nearby, told her what had happened that day in plain simple language without softening anything, and then asked if she had eaten, which she often had not, and produced food from somewhere with the reliable efficiency of a person who had decided that feeding her was now one of his responsibilities, without ever formally announcing this decision. She let him. She was not sure when she started looking forward to those evenings, when the footsteps in the corridor outside her room started to sound like something worth waiting for. But she noticed it one night, and sat with the noticing quietly. And it did not feel like danger, the way she had always expected warmth to feel. It felt like the opposite of danger. The conclave was formally censured by the Interspecies Court 6 weeks after Kethmora. The files were entered into the public record. The names of the scientists were read aloud in a chamber broadcast to 40 worlds. 3 of the other surviving experimental subjects were located through the data chip's records, alive, in hiding, carrying the same terrible gift as Valeth, and contact was made, carefully, respectfully, on their terms. Therex was reassigned to a monitoring post at the edge of Conclave territory, a cold and unimportant station that processed cargo manifests and had very little else to offer. The Conclave issued no official comment on this reassignment. They did not need to. On the day that Marcus was cleared for active duty again, he found Valeth in her room packing a small bag. He leaned against the door frame and watched her. "Where are you going?" he asked. "There is a world in the outer reach where 2 of the other subjects are living," she said. "A research team has requested permission to study the modification, to understand it, to find a way to help manage it." She folded a piece of clothing with careful hands. "They asked me to come, to help explain what I know." "That is a long trip," Marcus said. "Yes," she said. A pause. "My leave starts tomorrow," he said. She looked up at him. He looked back at her with those steady brown eyes, and that expression, that was not quite a smile, but lived close to one, the same expression he had worn on the floor of a dead colony, when the entire world was ash and silence, and he had said the most surprising thing she had ever heard in her life. She did not ask him to come. She simply moved to the door, where he was standing, and stopped beside him, and held out her hand, open, palm up, steady. He looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then he took it. Her field hummed between their joined fingers, warm and present and real, And his hand was warm too, and the golden tracery of new cellular structures showed faintly under the skin of his forearm, where his body had been quietly rewriting itself for weeks, building something new in response to her, the way life always finds a way to answer what it is given. She looked at their joined hands for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. "I used to say everything I touch dies," she said. "I know," he said. "I do not think that is true anymore," she said. Marcus smiled, fully this time, without the almost. "No," he said. "I do not think it is either." They walked out of the room together and down the corridor and out into whatever came next. And somewhere in the cold, deep records of the Conclave's most classified archive, a single line had been quietly added to the file on human biological classification. Added by an unknown clerk who had read the Kethmora reports and drawn the only conclusion the evidence supported. It read, "Do not attempt to break what rebuilds itself. Do not attempt to isolate what reaches toward others. Do not, under any circumstances, give a human being something worth protecting, because they will not stop." Valeth never read that line. She did not need to.